Good morning and welcome to the Johnson Space Center. Thank you for joining us here this morning for the joint post-flight press conference for the STS-71 and Mir 18 crew members. Now to start the conference and to introduce the rest of the crew members is the commander of STS-71, Navy Captain Robert Hoot Gibson. Hoot.
Thank you, Eileen, and welcome to the post-flight press conference for Mir 18 and STS-71. It was a bit of a complex mission, and so I'm sure the debriefing will be done in a little bit of a complex way. But first, let me start off and introduce the two crews that we have here in Houston today. Seated immediately to my right, our mission pilot for STS-71, Charlie Precourt. Next to Charlie, our payload commander and mission specialist number 1, Dr. Ellen Baker. Next to Ellen, our flight engineer, mission specialist number 2, Dr. Greg Harbough. Seated next to Greg, our mission specialist number 3, and the Mir 18 backup crew member, Dr. Bonnie Dunbar. And then we have the crew of Mir 18, starting with the board engineer, Mr. Gennady Strekalov, the commander of Mir 18, Vladimir Dezhurov, and our very own cosmonaut researcher aboard Mir 18, Dr. Norm Thagard. And if we could start right in with the slides, the STS-71 slides. We had a crew patch that was designed by famous aviation artist Bob McCall. Bob also designed the crew emblem for the Apollo-Soyuz docking, which of course took place back in 1975, so it was a real pleasure for us to have Bob involved once again with the design of ours. We lifted off 3 months and about 2 weeks after the launch of Mir 18, and we're finally on our way after a lot of preparations. We of course launched into a ground-up rendezvous aimed at intercepting and rendezvousing with the Mir, so we did a number of rendezvous burns with the OMS engines to put us on the right flight path to intercept and actually dock. And this is one of those OMS burns performed in the dark, and I think this was our major height adjust burn that we did on the first day to raise our orbit up very close to the Mir.
Here's a photo of Anatoly and Nick. Anatoly Solovyev, the commander, of course, of Mir 19, who's now on board, and Nikolai Budarin. The 4 Russians, actually all 4 of them, I can't think of 4 finer gentlemen to represent Russia, as well as 4 finer friends that we've come to know them as. We'll really be looking forward to getting back together with Anatoly and Nick after their landing in Kazakhstan and back in Russia when we can visit them after their mission's over at the end of next month. This is a shot of the activity during rendezvous from the flight deck. You can see Greg working away with the handheld laser, taking range and range rate marks on the Mir, and I'm in the photo in the lower right-hand corner operating a laptop computer to control the trajectory control system lasers that were also used from the payload bay to get that kind of information for the rendezvous.
While Greg and Charlie and Hoot were operating the aft flight deck, I was up in the front with the VHF radio, and my job was to conduct communications with the Mir. We were able to make contact on time and then to exchange various calls on distance, range rate, and one particularly important call at 55 feet when I called out our range at 55 feet so that the Mir could desaturate their gyrodynes and then disable their attitude control.
We had a very spectacular view of the Mir space station as we were closing in, gradually decreasing the range on flight day 3, leading into the rendezvous. That's an early shot of it. Here's a little bit later shot after the Mir has maneuvered to attitude and feathered the solar arrays, getting ready for us to dock.
This is kind of an interesting view. In the lower viewport there is Volodya taking that video of us approaching, and then in the smaller upper window is Norm with another camera. I guess it was around this point where Hoot was thinking about maybe negotiating a price for the final closure. And then this is a view from the aft flight deck showing the hard mate, what it looked like out the window. And this picture doesn't do it justice in the sense that that whole big space station was just right outside that window. It was real close by.
You may have seen, and we're about to show a video in just a minute that'll show a lot of this. We got to recreate an event that took place 20 years ago, almost to the day. The handshake between Tom Stafford and Alexei Leonov in the Apollo-Soyuz docking, and of course we were able to recreate this on Flight Day 3 of STS-71.
The earlier slide showed the view out the aft window. This one gets a little bit of 3 out of the 4 windows. The mirror, of course, is huge and just filled up our view as we looked out the flight deck. So we took a couple different camera angles with a few different lenses, but I'll tell you, none of them really can convey what it did look like. You could just catch little clips of it with the camera.
We also said about trying to get some different views of the orbiter than what you normally see. This is a picture that I took out of the Cavant 2 module, out of that large viewport that Volodya had been taking the movies from earlier. And this view is over the Crimea, and the Dnieper River is very clearly evident there. And then here's a shot of Hoot that we took also from the same window. Nice close-up. You can see he's got a big smile on his face there.
This is a view of the orbiter tail, of course, and in the top of the picture, starburst view of the sun gleaming through some of the equipment. You see the docking targets there located on the mirror structure. This is from a port in the Crystal module as you transfer immediately leaving the ODS, or the orbiter docking system, headed into the mirror. As you float by there, you have this porthole that gives you this view, and every time you float by there, you think to yourself, you've just got to capture this photo somehow. And the colors are so brilliant, and the size of the vehicle is so impressive sitting there right next to you that it's a really inspiring view. And on the inside, coming from where I took the picture forward towards the module, the base block part of the module, this is in the Crystal, and it gives you great perspective on how tight a squeeze it was to get through from the orbiter into the Crystal, and a lot of the equipment that's located in the modules as we head towards the base block.
Well, immediately after opening the hatch, we exchanged positions in various modules. This happens to be after one of the ceremonies in which we presented Anatoly with his Houston's rocket shirt. It was a little hard for him, I think, to remove it. This is in the base block, and it's in front of the table. I have to mention that Anatoly became a fan in Russia. One Sunday, there was a Houston Rockets game broadcast over to Russia. They won by 1 point. We were in class the next day, and all he could talk about was that game. So he's a real fan. And of course, immediately after opening the hatch, it was like coming to the home of old friends, because the Mir 18 crew invited us into the base block, and I got to say hi to the people we'd watched launch in March, and it was a real nice experience to be greeted by Gennady.
Well, we had a lot to do, of course, once the ships were connected, and part of our main objective was to gather some physiologic data on Norm and Gennady and Volodya after their 3-month stay, and so we got busy in the lab right away. In fact, we got the lab up and running prior to docking, and the day after docking got busy with a lot of our activities.
In this photo, I'm working with Gennady on the barrow experiment. Will be a lot of discussion, has been a lot of discussion about the various physiological experiments that we've conducted. But the barrel receptors of the neck are partially responsible for making sure that you keep blood in your head when you stand up very rapidly, or for people who come back from long space flights are able to walk around. It's involved in the cardiovascular system. It's an experiment that's flown before on space and life sciences space lab flights. And Gennady was not only a real trooper when it came to taking the measurements, he was really an active participant in making sure we got good data as well.
And there was a bit of transition for the Mir 18 crew to transition to be STS-71 crew members, so I had to go rope Volodya into getting into the lab occasionally. He had a lot to do in the Mir to get ready for his departure, and we, of course, had a lot going on in the space lab getting ready for our return.
One of our big activities during the dock phase for those of us who were not doctors or scientists was transferring equipment. And here I'm filling a water tank. We actually transferred roughly 2.5 times the amount of water that was originally targeted. And we transferred from the orbiter to mirror, I think, 250 pieces of hardware and returned 200 pieces of hardware with a success rate of about 99%. There were just a couple of things that evidently were not accounted for. But we actually came back with a couple of things we didn't plan on coming back for, so we did better than 100% all told.
This is a photo taken from inside the Soyuz descent module while we were doing communications checkouts the day prior to undocking. I had the distinct privilege of being able to climb in there with Anatoly and Nick while we did this checkout and snap this photo while we were talking through the relay communication system with Houston and with Moscow. It was a real enchanted moment for me. And here's Nick with his two buddies getting ready for the next day's activities. They were doing suit checkouts, of course, to prepare for the Soyuz undocking.
One of the cornerstones of this program from the very start was adaptability and flexibility, both on the ground and in flight. And this is a small update to the undock procedure we received the morning of undocking.
And here's a shot. This was taken of Anatoly and Nikolai just before closing the hatch prior to undocking, the night before undocking. And this was our last chance to shake their hands and tell them farewell until we get to see them again when they come back.
This is a shot of the Soyuz after it had undocked and prior to our undocking, or actually during it. Nikolai was up in a window in the front called the blister, taking pictures and video of our undocking. We could see the whole Soyuz out the commander's window on the port side of the shuttle.
It was a busy time, the docking, undocking, and fly-around time. We were lucky that we could get the camera out the window every now and then. We intended to take a lot more pictures than we did, but it was just so busy on the flight deck doing the real work that we didn't have the opportunities that we thought we would prior to flight.
And as we left the Soyuz, we could see it in the horizon. It eventually receded into darkness and became a star, which we saw for several days following that. And of course, as Bonnie said, once the fly around was done and the separation was done, it sort of disappeared into the distance, and we could catch a glimpse of it on some of the night passes. It was hard saying goodbye to our friends, and we do look forward to seeing them again. We did get a few shots, not many for Earth observation. This shot actually is the coast of California. It gives you a look at the weather stopping at the coast and some of the topography and some of the fault lines in that area.
We shot a couple of interesting photos. Like Bonnie said, we didn't get a lot of time to look at the Earth, but this was one of the shots. And once in a while, over cold water, over the ocean, you'll have cold water clouds above them. And when a ship goes through underneath, it'll precipitate a change in the clouds, and you're able to see a ship wake reflected in the actual clouds up over the water. And that's what we see in this picture here.
Had some nice passes over South America. This is a pass over the Andes Mountains.
My crewmates reluctantly allowed me to put this photo in here since I'm from this area. It's one of the more recognizable features of land on the planet, at least for those who are from there. You can see clearly Boston, Cape Cod, at the bottom of the picture, Martha's Vineyard. My hometown is up under the clouds that are in the upper left corner there, Hudson, Massachusetts. Thanks to my crewmates for letting me share that with you.
It's always cloudy there, isn't it?
Not.
As you probably saw, we came back and landed at the end of a 10-day mission, and for the first time in space, we had together a 10-person crew, and so we were able to make one of the largest starburst pictures on orbit that anyone has ever been able to put together. We had an 11th person taking the photo for us here. With that, why don't we move right into the video? We've put together a film clip of the activities of STS-71. And again, the crew emblem designed by Bob McCall. The breakfast, in this case, was a lunch. And of course, the crew members again, the pilot Charlie Precourt, Nikolai Buterin, who's aboard the Mir still, the Mir 19 commander Anatoly Solovyev, Hoot Gibson, of course, our payload commander Ellen Baker, and Dr. Bonnie Dunbar and Greg Harbough. We walked out at early afternoon. This was a whole lot nicer day to be walking out to the orbiter than the previous attempt had been, when they had to actually put the crew van under the awning because the rain was coming down too hard, and so we had to make a quick ingress into the vehicle.
There's a good shot of Hoot when we finally got the go for launch. 2 minutes, visors down, pseudo 2 on, and have a good flight. We were off and running. Most folks maybe don't realize that rendezvous started right here. We had a 5-minute launch window, and we had to wait for the moment in time when Mir's orbit was right directly overhead of us, and we could insert ourselves into the same plane that they were in. We hit that right on time on this particular day. The weather cooperated, and it was a magnificent launch. Anatoly and Nick were very impressed with the vehicle, and we were off and running with a great start here.
Okay, once we got on orbit, we had an awful lot of work to do to get ready for the rendezvous. We opened the payload bay doors. You can see the docking mechanism sitting there with the 6 black dots on the forward end of it. We had just a tremendous amount of activity at the end of Flight Day 1 and then all of Flight Day 2, getting our computers ready to go, getting our rendezvous tools set up. We had 1 or 2 unexpected events, including a little work that had to be done on the handheld laser, but we got ready to go in time.
We flew an intercept on the Mir that had us pick up the radius vector, or essentially come in right underneath the Mir and fly up below them all the way into docking. This was a pretty intensive period, as Bonnie and Greg have alluded to, on the flight deck, with the 3 of us flying and everyone else helping as we come in. This is a shot that you saw earlier from the Mir of the orbiter over the Red Sea. We had a very narrow corridor that we had to intercept and fly up so as not to disturb any of the solar arrays on the Mir with our plumes. And as we got into about 500 feet or so, the Mir started its maneuver to the final attitude for docking.
And as it did that, we were able to start locking on with the TCS laser system, because on the end of the docking module were the reflectors that system could lock onto. So I'm coordinating that activity here with the ground controllers, and you'll see a shot here briefly of that final maneuver. You can see the docking node in the center there starting to come more in alignment with our axis, and you can also see the relative motion of the solar arrays in this particular view. And we were pretty much at the end of this event when the Mir was in attitude. We were ready to go on with it.
As Ben had alluded, it was a very busy time. We had, again, several calls going back and forth between the Mir and the shuttle as docking occurred. We borrowed a little bit of video from the Mir 18 crew on that sequence.
As you may recall, we moved into 30 feet and held for 5 minutes, waiting for the timing to get exactly right. It was our objective in the course of the rendezvous not to have to fire any braking pulses towards the Mir, and we were able to work the timeliness, the closure rates, and the distances such that worked out just fine. We were able to utilize natural orbital braking to bring us all the way into docking, and never did have to fire a braking pulse all the way in. This is the actual moment of docking as seen from the aft flight deck, from one of the payload bay cameras looking out. And this is a shot that came down to the ground that showed both the centerline camera view as well as the view out the aft flight deck. As you probably recall, we had a very tight window on the actual docking.
Well, this was the hard part. We had 6 people with cameras on one side of the hatch and 2 people with cameras on the other side of the hatch, and of course everybody wanted to get a good picture. We had a variety of different cameras, stills, videos, IMAX, you name it, we had it. We didn't want to miss the hatch opening and the handshake, and you'll see we're flashing lights in each other's faces here. But it was an awfully exciting time, and we just couldn't wait to get that hatch open and greet our comrades.
We had been training and preparing for this moment for so long over the preceding year, working together with the Mir 18 and the Mir 19 crews. When the actual moment came, we found ourselves looking around and saying, "Are we really here? And have we really made this work?" We had just a very brief greeting and a very brief ceremony, if you will, at the actual hatch. And of course, this was the first time that we had seen Norm and Volodya and Gennady, I guess in the previous, 8 months, I guess it had been since we had seen them.
And of course, going a little out of plan, we had a plan prior to this, and first thing we did was take that plan and toss it, and we all lined up and went into the Mir at that time. All 10 of us, I guess, were in there at that time, and I kept the camera running as we went through the Crystal module and arrived in the base block where we did our welcoming ceremony, I think.
So there we were, all accumulating ourselves in the base block or the core module. Obviously elated, really happy to see Gennady and Volodya and Norm, and they were, I think, happy to see us. I think it's the first time there have been 10 human beings in one spacecraft, and to commemorate the occasion, Bonnie put a STS-71 crew patch up on one of their comm pieces of equipment.
The following day, then, we congregated back in the space lab, and we performed a gift exchange, and we also mated a model of the Mir space station with the space shuttle. A little bit adrift. There's also a tour of the space shuttle that was conducted for Russian audiences. Norm did this, and in these sequences he's taking Gennady around the shuttle, and he'll later narrate this for a Russian audience, first in the commander's seat and now back in the aft flight deck where Charlie is showing him the controls for the docking adapter.
Well, once we got all the PAO events out of the way, we could get to work on some of the science objectives of the flight, and the day after docking we did start on some of the experiments. We had a small series of experiments to do on this flight that looked primarily at the cardiovascular system, exercise, fitness, endurance, those sorts of things, and also some metabolic studies to look at biochemical, hormonal changes in the blood, changes in the blood chemistry, things like that. And Bonnie and I orchestrated most of this. Couldn't have done it, obviously, without our subjects' participation and full cooperation.
And it was a pretty long day. As Ellen mentioned, we had rehearsed this before, and with our Payload Operations Control Center down here on the ground, the POC. It all went as planned. As was previously mentioned, we performed several baro experiments on all 3 of the subjects, got some excellent quality data. We're very happy with it. Ellen also performed a number of metabolic experiments called MGAS. Here she's connecting up a rebreathing bag to Volodya.
And we also flew the lower body negative pressure device as a joint experiment between the Russians and the Americans. We had principal investigators from both countries on all of our studies. The Russians use lower body negative pressure as a countermeasure. We use it as a research tool, and we used it as a little of both on this flight.
Craig is wincing because he's having his blood taken there, and he'd rather be jogging like I am here, I think.
It didn't really hurt. Okay, as mentioned earlier, we did an awful lot of transferring of equipment, scientific and material. Here Hoot is transferring something called the PCG, and it's just one example of the tremendous amount of effort we put into those 5 dock days and moving stuff back and forth between the 2 vehicles. One unsung tremendous capability of the shuttle is its ability to return hardware back to Earth, and we took full advantage of it on this flight.
One of the more pleasant things we had the opportunity to do was talk to school kids around the world. We had SAREX contacts in California, Texas, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and over in Russia. We used the SAREX radios on board both the station Mir and the shuttle.
And as we showed in our slide, one of the big moments for us was to be able to show the new rocket's emblem and present the shirt to Anatoly, who promptly put it on and decided to demonstrate his basketball style, which I'm sure that is the envy of anyone who's been in zero-G.
Here we are closing the hatch, and we've already said our last goodbye there. And then there's Anatoly saying goodbye to us, eating a tortilla through one of the viewports on Kvant. Or Crystal, I guess it is.
Greg and Bonnie were talking there about getting pressure checks done as we prepared for this moment. The Soyuz undocks from the Mir on the opposite end of the station and begins its fly around. We watched it with amazement at how well controlled it was and how stable. And Ellen's in the process of snapping it on the IMAX here, which came out quite well. We got to review that the other day. But Anatoly flew out of plane here as you see him moving between the panels to a position about 60, 80 meters to the commander's side of the orbiter, I guess the port side, and station kept there while we prepared to do our undocking.
These scenes make the Soyuz look pretty small and look pretty far away. Let me tell you how close he looked when he was sitting out there. I guess he had a laser rangefinder, and you can see some of the jet firings here as he was holding attitude just right out the window. We felt like we could reach out and touch him because he was that close to us. His range, I think, was about 65 meters, but again, he looked very, very close as the actual time for undocking approached.
At about 3 minutes prior to the actual separation, I sent the command to open the hooks, and everything worked just like clockwork. That mechanism worked superbly. And there was a set of push-off springs that separated the 2 vehicles initially, and then at about 2 feet, Hoot initiated a separation maneuver, 4 pulses, to complete the SEP sequence. This is a view, I guess, from the Soyuz looking at us as we do that undocking.
Of course, when we finally separated, the Mir 18 crew came up, waved goodbye. We had some exchanges on the VHF radio as well as we said sayonara. You're also seeing on the left there the Soyuz redocking. It was a little departure from our plan to dock an orbit later, but you can just see it start to close in there. Anatoly did an excellent job. I was in the commander's seat, and he flew from the port side to the starboard side of the vehicle and did a very smooth redocking.
As we completed that part of the fly around and got the photo there, we started a complete revolution around the Mir and got these real pretty views of the station. And here you can see it rotating. The folks on the ground were very interested to see views of the different sides of the Mir, to see what kind of condition it's been in after a long exposure to space.
As Charlie mentioned, we flew all the way around the Mir, doing more than a 360-degree fly around, and finally got to a point overhead the Mir on what we call the -R bar, and did our final separation burn and started translating away from the Mir space station.
Well, shortly after that, we continued our work in the lab. Of course, one of the things that would be important for Norman and his crew members to do is to maintain their conditioning in anticipation of entry. The intent was to exercise twice a day. I think we missed that a few times for those guys, but they did manage to get some of their exercise in. And another modification we did was to use the recumbent seats at the shuttle. so that they would have the gravity vector going through the chest rather than from the head to the toes, and make the G-forces of re-entry a lot easier on them.
This, of course, shows the shuttle as we re-entered, flew around the hack, and came down final approach. The one little surprise we got on final was a master alarm, which proved to be a false sensor indication, but we just pressed right on. At 300 feet, I lowered the gear here, and Hoot set up on the outer glide path just nice and solid and brought it on in.
We were a relatively lightweight orbiter, about 219,000 pounds coming in for landing, so we were shooting at a 195 knot touchdown as opposed to the heavyweight flights where we shoot at 205 knots. And this is us touching down on runway 15 at the Kennedy Space Center on July the 7th, ending a very successful 10-day flight. We, of course, used the drag chute. We had a normal drag chute deploy. For this landing, we had a little bit of crosswind, not enough to cause us any real difficulty, and were able to fly a normal approach and landing all the way through the drag chute deployment and drag chute jettison that you see here.